Welcome back to the Jeff and Bill Show. We're tracking the Trump trial taking place in Manhattan today. Michael Cohen testified yesterday. Will be back on the stand today. They're taking Wednesday off and Friday off. Wednesday, they typically take off. That's normally what happens in this case. And then Friday, they're giving President Trump off so he can go back down to Florida and attend his son's high school graduation. So you got a few more days, but this is the big fish. This is the big witness that everybody's been waiting for. Michael Cohen, again, testifying yesterday, may face cross-examination today. We'll see how long it takes the prosecution to get through their case. But joining us in studio is Chris Murray. He's a partner with First and 14th Law, and he's been helping us analyze this case. How's it going for Trump? Good week for Trump, bad week for Trump. Chris, thanks for being on the Jeff and Bill program.
Hey, it's my pleasure to be here. Good morning, fellas.
So yesterday, give us your sense. Well, first of all, let's talk about who Michael Cohen was and is.
Was, who he was, who he is, who he will be.
Yeah, let's start there. And why is he important to this case?
Sure, that's fair. So Michael Cohen was and I'm going to use this term. The folks watching online can see I've got the scare quotes up like with my fingers. Yeah, he was a fixer for the Trump organization. He was also a lawyer for the Trump organization. But Michael Cohen didn't really function as a lawyer. He functioned as sort of a human fire hose. What his job was, and by the way, this is not unique to the Trump organization, right? Any publicly prominent individual, right? Sometimes publicly prominent companies will keep somebody around, whether, permanently paying them or, in the Rolodex, like for a quick call. If there's a crisis, you call this person to help make it go away. And that's what Michael Cohen did for the Trump organization for about 10 years. I think he joined the Trump organization like in the late 2000s.
Yeah, and some of the stuff he did was call media reporters if they were doing bad articles on Trump. This was right. Even before Trump ever thought about running for president. And
again, this is a completely having somebody do this is totally legitimate. Frankly, you have to do it if you're very public. As some of your listeners probably know, I worked for a presidential campaign, right? And I was deputy general counsel for that campaign. I was the person who called the media for that campaign a couple times when there were ridiculous stories getting ready to come out where there was no basis for it. And what does a lawyer do on a call like that? They call up the reporter and say, hey, what's your basis for this? Because I'm going to tell you why it's false. And if you continue to go forward with this story, knowing what I have now told you, this begins to look like actual malice. And this begins to look like something that my guy can sue you for.
Interesting.
And that was a big part of what Michael Cohen did for Donald Trump.
And how, just on a sidebar, how would the media respond? How would this liberal media often respond to that?
I mean, most reporters, when you're talking to them like that, they listen up, right? I mean, they listen up. Well, I mean, because look, when you say, hey, here's some stuff, it's very rare that they get a lawyer calling them, right? So if a lawyer calls them and says, hey, I want to walk you through, right, why your story's false. And they're getting half an hour maybe of your time to kind of go back and forth with you. Most of the time, if they say, well, I hadn't heard some of that, I've got to look into it. Who could I call to verify this? Who else would know this, right? Most reporters will listen to that. Then again, if it's Donald Trump these days, I don't know how much they would listen.
So Michael Cohen does that for a number of years for Donald Trump, fixes problems, and he's called to testify. He's got recordings.
Yep.
How did yesterday go for Donald Trump?
I mean, so I think how it ends up having gone for him in the long run is going to turn on the cross-examination today. I will say as a lawyer, I did not think yesterday went that well for the president because and the reason for that is that the best way to cross-examine Michael Cohen, right, is to say, hello, sir. You've been convicted for perjury, haven't you? Right. And so you're a documented and serial liar. Right. So why should this jury believe anything you have to say? The secret recording. Right. And this has been in the news before, but the recording that he made of what he says is allegedly working out one of these two payments specifically getting money to himself to make the payment. I think it was to Ms. McDougal, and then also working out how to get money to David Pecker, the publisher of the National Enquirer, to reimburse him for a payment he made to Stormy Daniels. I think I just have those two backwards, actually. I think the payments went the other way. The fact that Donald Trump's voice is on the recording asking how much do we have to pay for this, right? And some of it's out of context, and the cross-examination is going to bring that out. But hearing David Cohen's voice and Donald Trump's voice on the same tape, the reason the prosecution, that's so important to the prosecution and I think beneficial for them, is it insulates this against it just being David Cohen's story, right? Because David Cohen's a liar. We know this.
Michael Cohen.
Oh, sorry, Michael Cohen's a liar. Cohen. I apologize to all the David Cohens out there.
So help me understand where the crime is, right? Has Donald Trump said that he never paid Stormy Daniels?
No. I mean, he's been ambiguous about it.
Right. But he never denied that there was a payment, a hush money payment to Stormy Daniels.
Well, and by the way, even if he denied it, right, making a hush money payment, people use this term hush money.
Right. It's not illegal.
People make these payments all the time. Yeah, that's completely legal. Like, hey, I mean, anybody who's ever been involved in a lawsuit, right? Yeah. If the case settles, most of the time there's a confidentiality agreement. There's also a mutual non-disparagement agreement.
Right.
What does that mean? Hey,
it happens if you leave a company sometimes too.
Totally, because sometimes there's bad feelings in a situation like that. And we're going to both agree that we're not going to say something nasty about the other one, right? So that we can move on with our lives. Yeah. People make those sorts of payments every day. It's totally legal.
Right. So what if he has this recorded? That's where I'm kind of like going, well, so he made this payment. And this is here's where I'm ultimately trying to go is he's relying on this guy who has a legal degree. He's certified to be a lawyer in the state of New York. He's relying on his advice. Donald Trump's not an expert in this stuff. If Michael Cohen wants to set up this company to pay this, to do that type of thing, where's the crime?
Well, I mean, so this, by the way, gets to in this New York case, I was with you guys last week, right? And I think I mentioned that the big issue here is, the big legal issue is, the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, knew about these payments, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Decided they were not criminal, right? Did fine the National Enquirer for an undisclosed campaign contribution.
Okay.
Right. But civilly, didn't deal with it criminally. The theory of the New York prosecutors is that Donald Trump's company cooked the books to hide these payments because these payments were evidence of a crime, except there was no underlying crime, right? Yeah. That's the legal argument.
Right.
Factually, though, right, sometimes the law and the facts, right, while the trial is going on, can kind of get separated.
Okay.
It's a judge's job to make sure that the only facts that come in are relevant to the law, right? As we know, the judge in this case is giving the prosecutors a lot of leeway. Some folks might say the judge in this case is giving the prosecutors the ability to basically air all the dirty laundry they want, whether they can get a conviction or not, right? So Cohen's testimony is troublesome just because it makes it look like Donald Trump knew what Cohen was up to. Cohen is testifying, look, I actually learned how to make these sorts of payments and make them hard to track down from Donald Trump. I didn't set stuff up. It wasn't really my advice on how to do it. Donald Trump already knew how to do this, and I was sort of schooled in his school of how to make these sorts of payments. And I was just doing something that he orchestrated and knew how to set up.
But again, so what? So what if he created this little side company? So what if money went to a hush, to keep a sexual liaison that he had? So what?
I mean, so again, that's where I completely agree with that as a legal matter.
Yeah.
Right. But if you look at what has happened over the last week in the case, like who have the two big witnesses been? Right. First, Stormy Daniels, Stephanie Clifford. Right. One of the two porn stars, or I guess the porn star. What does she say? Most of her testimony is about embarrassing details of the alleged sexual liaison. right? And things that she heard.
In some capacity, yeah. And Bill and I were talking about this because if you read the transcripts, it is detail oriented. It's detail on the type of floor. It's detail on the flowers. It's detail on the magazine. It's detail on the tables. It was detail on the light coming in. And then the deed happens and she can't remember anything about it.
Right.
She's like, all of a sudden, I have no clothes on and I'm looking at the ceiling. And you're like, how? And she's not like a person that is not used to being in front of people with no clothes on.
100%. And I actually thought the cross-examination of her, some in the media were criticizing that. I thought the cross-examination of her was relatively effective exactly on that point, right? But what's the prosecution doing? Trying to say, look, forget about whether there was a federal crime. This is embarrassing. Trump wanted to cover it up, and trying to turn that into a crime in and of itself. It will be on the defense to come out and say exactly what you just said. Well, so what, guys?
I got to jump because I don't understand the issue about what the underlying crime is. That's fairly obvious. It was a personal payment that Donald Trump had Michael Cohen pay, and then he claimed it as a business expense. That's the underlying crime. The idea of what's the crime here that we're asking the question, the crime is very well defined. Whether or not it rises to the level of a felony, I would disagree. It seems to me to be a misdemeanor that 9 times out of 10 would be dealt with a fine. And part of it is because, Trump did claim for amorphous legal expenses, work that Michael Cohen at that time objectively did not provide. And he claimed it as a business expense, not a personal expense. And what Bragg is doing is saying, no, this was a personal expense, not a business expense. And he's hiding this, and it's not allowed, and he's not allowed to do that. That is the underlying crime. To me, not a felony. They're raising it based on the election into felony, but that is a misdemeanor. And under New York law, from my understanding, is a misdemeanor because you can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, Bill, if they were bringing that case, maybe. I'd have to see the jury instruction on, because they're not bringing a tax case, right? No. So what they're bringing is an election corruption case, right? Yeah. That the underlying crime is corrupting the 2016 presidential election. Yeah. And the only way you get there is that the public had a right to know about this liaison, right? Yeah. There was this payment made to shush it up, and that payment needed to be made by the Trump organization, by the Trump campaign, right? Or at least disclosed as a contribution to the Trump campaign because it benefited the Trump campaign, and it wasn't. Yeah. And the FEC said, hey, maybe the FEC said, as far as the National Enquirer goes, civil fine, yeah, that looks like maybe it was an undisclosed contribution, right? Michael Cohen, nothing, right? So I don't, however, he has been charged for perjury, etc., for this specific act as well. So part of what he was, etc. So there have been some criminal consequences for that. And part of Bragg's case is that they did not make it a Trump organization payment. They hid it by making it a Trump campaign. They hid it by making a Trump org payment, and it was beneficiary for Donald Trump, and the business shouldn't be paying to cover up for his mistress. It's the same thing that WWE chairman Vince McMahon was just outed for recently. Same thing. He was using company money to pay for his liaisons. Yeah, sure. That's what they bounced him for. Sure, that's right. But but again, like, who do you owe? We're getting into the legalese here, but like when you run a company, right? Yeah. Who do you owe the duty of loyalty to, right? The duty of care, like when you're running that company, you owe it to your shareholders, right? The people who have a profit interest in that company. And if you're using company money to pay for personal expenses, leave aside if it's something salacious like this, if it's even like, hey, I went and bought myself a car, right? The people who have got a claim against you are those shareholders. That is not ordinarily a crime, right? Now, it might be theft, right? It might be theft from the company, but as I think we discussed last week, and I know some other times I've been on the show, the only person in America who would be charged with this is Donald Trump.
I want to bring this up about the fact that Michael Cohen did this for Trump regularly, right? So he was the guy that went out and browbeated the media on a regular basis. Was that to the benefit of Donald Trump personally or to Donald Trump's company?
Right. So the argument from the Trump organization is going to be, if Donald Trump is harmed, the Trump organization is harmed. Because, I mean, and by the way, there's something to this when it comes to Donald Trump, because like
his name's on everything.
It's on literally everything. Like, remember, like, he doesn't drink, and he's got wineries, and he had a vodka company, right? He puts his name on literally everything, and he is the brand. And so I guarantee there will be an argument from Trump's lawyers saying, this is like, if Donald Trump's image is harmed, right, the company is harmed. It hurts our brand value. And that's why the company ought to be making these payments anyway, right? Because leaving aside whether it's true or false, right? And by the way, one of the best facts here that a lot of folks haven't talked about in Michael Cohen's testimony for President Trump, and I expect the defense to emphasize it when they start cross-examining Mr. Cohen and in their argument later. He actually paid to cover up 3 stories. Right.
The bellman.
And one of them was unquestionably false.
That's
right?
exactly
This is the love child story that the bellman from his building said that, that Trump had, right? Everybody agrees that was just made up, right? Well, that person also was given money to go away, right? And that's also not surprising, because companies do this all the time. It's why people make up stories sometimes.
Well, and the calculation is, so let's use the bellman, for example, right? The calculation is, all right, I'm going to have to spend the next 2 weeks of my life dealing with interview after interview after interview after interview about this, denying it. I've got to go on CNN and Fox and MSNBC, and I've got to spend all this time. And I could just pay this guy $50,000, and which is what they paid him. And I don't have to deal with it at all.
Right. And again, I think that if you look at the prosecution will say, well, you paid these 2 women a lot more each. Not really. I mean, paid them a little over $100,000 to go away. And
they were actually like public figures. No one knows who the bellman is.
Correct. And I think that the defense will be wise to not spend a lot of time focus on whether or not which story was true,
right?
But instead to just say, we know for sure there was at least one false story in here, right? And what was illegitimate about that payment, right? Now, what was illegitimate about that?
Question I have is, if we are assuming that Trump Organization and lots of other businesses go ahead and make these type of hush money payments, is the process involved here the one that is used in all the others? Did they use the standard procedure? If Trump Organization was trying to protect the Trump name and brand, is this the manner in which they need to do it, and would be the acceptable ethical way to do business?
So I'll tell you, this is why right at the beginning when Jeff asked, right, was it in general a good or bad day for President Trump? I think it was a bad day because of the atmospherics around that and because of the recording. Right. That, what the recording makes it sound like, certainly the way the prosecution presented it. I think that the direct examination of Cohen yesterday was technical but effective. Right. And it makes it seem like, look, here's the biggest point that you got from that direct examination. Donald Trump knew that there was going to be some money paid to some people, including Stormy Daniels. Right. Well, eventually to get her silenced, and Karen McDougal to get her silenced. And it appears that for whatever reason, he didn't want it done directly, right? He wanted it done indirectly or in a way that was plausibly deniable or with cash or whatever, right? And that is, I won't say that it's like totally unusual, but I'll say that more often what you would see if the company said, for example, if the Trump Organization was saying, this will hurt our brand, we have to protect our brand, why wouldn't the Trump Organization just pay it directly? That will be the prosecution's argument.
And that is what would normally happen, is normally in those situations, even if it is a false claim against a business, the business writes the check. The lawyer doesn't go out and take out personal loans and then later claim they're offering legal services, and that goes down on the books of the business. That's the system, and that's part of the underlying crime, is the manner in which they went about this.
Yeah, and
that's the issue too here.
And for the record, for all my clients listening, I do not offer that service.
That's good. That's good.
Speaking of that, we're talking to Chris Murray. He's a partner with First and 14th. They deliver fearless, creative, and principled advocacy for their clients' most significant legal matters, public and private. You can visit their website, first-14th.com. That's first-14th.com. We'll continue this conversation about Michael Cohen. Joining us in studio is Chris Murray. He's a partner with First and 14th. They're a law firm here in Colorado that do great work, but he's got a great background in campaign law, working for a number of presidential campaigns. And I want to talk about Michael Cohen, what happened yesterday. Help me understand why an attorney would record their client.
I mean,
it seems like unethical to me.
Yeah. I mean, so almost never for like a great reason for the client.
Right.
And for the record, the only time I've ever recorded a client was the client asked me to.
Yeah.
Right. So
or a deposition.
That's like the one good reason is like, hey, we're preparing for trial. The client wants to hear themselves.
Yeah.
Right. Or the client wants to save money instead of having. Sometimes you'll memorialize like a little piece of legal advice in a memo that you give to them.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a couple clients occasionally say, hey, like, are you okay if we just like record the conversation and then I can keep that? No problem. Right. That's the good reason. That's not why Michael Cohen did this. Michael Cohen said in court the reason why he did it was so that he could play the recording, right, or parts of it for David Pecker at the National Enquirer, so that Pecker would know that he was going to be repaid by the Trump Organization for the National Enquirer's payment for the Karen McDougal story. That's what Cohen said. I think naturally Michael Cohen's going to be cross-examined by President Trump's lawyers, and they're going to say, well, actually, the reason that you did it was so that you could be sitting in this chair right now.
Or make money later.
100%.
Sell this, write books. 100%. I mean,
which, by the way, he's done.
Right.
He's done.
And these TikTok videos.
Yeah.
How big of a problem are these TikTok videos? So if you're not familiar with this, for a number of evenings following the case, he would get on TikTok and tell people what he thought about the case. That was problematic in itself because he's a witness, but TikTok provides this monetary side of it where people can gift you money. And he ends up with these weird little funny hats that he doesn't put on himself, but people pay to put on him. It's wild. But the judge not happy about this.
No, I mean, the judge shouldn't be happy about it. So, by the way, look, can we just start with a little table setting on TikTok? TikTok is always a problem. Like don't get on it. It's poison, right? I won't deny that it's entertaining, but lots of things that are bad for you are entertaining. But no, the TikTok stuff, somebody just actually showed this to me last weekend.
Yeah.
I was totally ignorant of it. But yeah, he's going on giving sort of Michael Cohen's thoughts on what's happening in the Trump trial, and people are paying to put graphics on his face and like hats on his head and stuff, and he's just sitting there like some court jester, right? I mean, really looks like a complete fool, but he's monetizing this in real time, right? Yeah, if I was the judge, I would think it was a huge problem because you are a witness, you're speaking to the public, and you're offering your opinion for money, right? That makes the whole proceeding seem less serious. Right. And it also, by the way, I won't be surprised if we see some of those TikTok videos when he is cross-examined.
Really? They can bring that in?
Why not? I mean, you can use it to impeach him. Right now, they may say, Mr. Cohen, isn't it true that you've made a little cottage industry of offering your opinions on how this trial is going for your former client? Yes, that's true. And isn't it true that you've made X, dollars doing that for people to put like silly elf hats on your head digitally while you do that? Yes, that's also true. So if he admits all of that, they might not be able to bring the TikTok videos in, right? But if he fights on any of that, right, and says, oh, well, I don't know if I'd say that I allowed an elf hat on my head. So, okay, let's bring up Defense Exhibit 7, right? And it's going to be him in a dumb elf hat.
Help me understand the gross up payments, because I think that this, from my read, and I'm not an attorney, I'm married to one, which makes, our fights interesting, which is like, Mr. Hunt, did you or did you not say you were going to do the dishes?
Mrs. Hunt, did you or did you not agree to marry me?
Right. And I get cross-examined. So I'm reading through the grossed up payments. These are payments made from Donald Trump to Michael Cohen. This gets involved with the CFO, and Donald Trump adds additional money. So it's not just $150,000 to Stormy Daniels. It's now money, or whatever it was. Yep. It's money to cover taxes, to pay a bonus, all that stuff, and then they just write it in the ledger as legal services. And I would go, well, yeah, that's exactly what they are. Legal services, aren't they?
I mean, listen, and this is, again, and I know Bill will probably cringe on the other side of the glass here, right? Because I actually hate both sidism as much as I think you do. But this is just one of those, you can't ignore just the poetic irony here, right? Remember the Steele dossier.
Yep.
Okay. This is the exact issue with the Steele dossier. Okay. The Perkins Coie law firm, which represented Hillary Clinton's campaign, by the way, like in the exact same time frame as this, paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, as it turns out, to this ex-British spy to write essentially sort of a gross piece of fan fiction, right, about Donald Trump and shop it around to the government to get Crossfire Hurricane started. The Hillary Clinton campaign paid for that. How did they do that? They paid extra money to their law firm, Perkins Coie, and said legal services, right?
And how is it not legal services if the law firm's doing the work?
Well, I mean, so the FEC, when it came to that, said that's not legal services, right? Because what the law firm was doing actually is maybe laundering money, so that when you go to the FBI with the Steele dossier, the FBI can't get on the Federal Election Commission's website and say, hey, hold on a second. The guy who wrote this is a vendor for your campaign. You paid him $200,000. Why should we trust this?
Yeah. And then the idea being that when Jeffrey, you're talking about why wouldn't it be legal services? What function would the, and again, someone can drink on that one, would the law firm have in paying for a dossier to be created that assists one of their clients?
Right.
There's no legal boundaries there. They're not providing a single legal service. The same thing with, and that's the issue with Michael Cohen and the payments, when he pays the money to Stormy Daniels, there's nothing legal involved. I could do that, and I don't have to have a bar degree. So it's not a legal service.
But I guess if Michael Cohen's calling these media outlets to browbeat him, is that legal services?
I mean, so I'll actually say what Michael Cohen was doing here. And Bill, everything you just said is totally fair, right? But what Michael Cohen's doing here is, I actually think, a heck of a lot closer to legal services than what the Perkins Coie law firm was doing with the Steele dossier.
Yeah, because he's negotiating,
right? Because at least here there was ostensibly
NDAs and stuff.
Exactly. At least here there was something that kind of looks like a settlement payment, right, or a legal agreement for the rights to something.
Yeah.
And again, let's say, for example, and I mean, I wouldn't ever recommend a lawyer do this, right, but I'm sure it's happened before, that, hey, your client needs to make a settlement payment. They've been your client for 40 years. You trust them implicitly. They've never been late on a bill. They come to you and say, I am so embarrassed, right? But I've got a problem with my bank and I can't fund this settlement today. Will you please front me the money to make that payment? And you say, geez, you paid me all these years. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to do this, right? There'd be nothing unethical about a lawyer doing that, right? And then the client comes back and says, a month later when they've got the problem solved, hey, I know you've been sweating this. Thank you so much. Here's the money that you paid, plus here's a bonus for that, because I appreciate the service that you just provided me, right? And they called it legal services on their books. I'd say that's probably accurate, right? And that's going to be the argument from the Trump organization, right? Is going to be that, well, these were legal services. And we added stuff to it, not to be generous, right? But because he earned the money. His job was to make problems like this go away. He did it.
Yeah. And the difficulty in that one is going to be the idea that the Trump organization couldn't find $130,000. They have more than enough assets. And that's going to be the problem with that, is that tell me how this billion-dollar company couldn't write a $130K check. That's going to be a tough one for them to sell. That'll be on the redirection, that'll be where it goes.
So again, I agree. And that's why at the very top of the hour, when I said, I didn't think it was a great day for President Trump, because like that, whether that is a crime or not, right?
Yeah.
The idea that it seems like President Trump wanted to have the money come from somewhere other than something traceable to him, at least immediately. That's where, if you're in the jury, right? If I'm a juror, and I mean, it's so tough to be, imagine being an impartial juror in a case like this. But if you're a juror and this was anybody else, you'd say, why? I'm interested in why do that? I think they would be asking themselves exactly that question after the prosecution's questioning of Michael Cohen yesterday.
Talking to Chris Murray, he's a partner with First and 14th about the Michael Cohen testimonies that are taking place yesterday, today, and possibly tomorrow. We'll continue to track this. If you want to learn more about First and 14th, go to first-14th. That's all spelled out.com. That's their website there. They deliver fearless, creative, and principled advocacy for their clients' most significant legal matters, public and private, served on multiple presidential campaigns. Chris, thanks so much for being on the Jeff and Bill Show.
And it's always my pleasure, guys. Thank you.
Jeff and Bill, weekday mornings from 6 to 10 on News Talk 710, KNUS.